You won't believe what happened when the shortest, most overlooked soldier in the entire company became the unexpected hero that saved everyone's lives. Everything seemed hopeless during a deadly enemy ambush, until his greatest disadvantage transformed into the key to salvation for his entire unit. This is a story about how appearances deceive us, how our biggest flaws can become our greatest strengths, and how the person everyone underestimates might just be the one who changes everything. It's about a man who endured daily humiliation, constant mockery, and endless doubt from those who should have been his brothers in arms. But when death was closing in, when all hope seemed lost, when every strategy had failed and every escape route was blocked, it was this small, seemingly fragile soldier who found the impossible solution that no one else could execute. His story will make you question everything you think you know about strength, courage, and what it truly means to be a hero. What you're about to hear happened during one of the most intense military operations I've ever witnessed. And I promise you, the ending will completely change how you see the people around you. I'll never forget the first time I saw him walking into our military compound. Private Martinez was barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, maybe 130 pounds soaking wet, with a boyish face that made him look younger than his 22 years. While the rest of us towered over him like giants, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that most of us mistook for weakness. The afternoon sun was beating down mercilessly on the concrete parade grounds when the transport truck pulled up to discharge our newest batch of recruits. The temperature had to be pushing 95 degrees, and the asphalt was so hot you could feel it through the soles of your boots. Most of the new arrivals emerged from that truck looking nervous, excited, or trying too hard to appear tough. Some were already sweating through their uniforms before they'd taken 10 steps. Martinez was different. He stepped down from that truck with the calm composure of someone who'd already made peace with whatever challenges lay ahead. His uniform was perfectly pressed, despite the long journey, his boots polished to a mirror shine that reflected the harsh sunlight, and every piece of equipment was arranged with military precision that would have impressed a drill instructor. While other new arrivals fumbled with duffel bags and struggled to organize their gear in the oppressive heat, Martinez moved with the efficiency of someone who'd studied every regulation and prepared for every requirement. He didn't waste motion, didn't appear flustered by the chaos around him, and seemed completely unaffected by the intimidating atmosphere that had reduced some of the other new soldiers to nervous wrecks. The mockery started immediately. "Hey, did someone's little brother get lost and wander into our barracks?" Sergeant Williams called out, his voice carrying across the parade ground and causing an eruption of laughter from the other soldiers. Williams was a career military man with 20 years of service, the kind of person who believed that military effectiveness was directly proportional to physical intimidation. Martinez just nodded politely, found his assigned bunk, and began organizing his gear with methodical precision. He didn't respond to the joke, didn't try to defend himself, didn't show any sign that the comment bothered him. That silence, which should have earned him respect in a military culture that valued composure under pressure, instead painted a target on his back. What I noticed immediately was the way Martinez organized his personal space. While other soldiers threw their belongings haphazardly onto their bunks and into their lockers, Martinez arranged everything with almost obsessive attention to detail. His clothes were folded according to regulation specifications that most soldiers ignored, his toiletries arranged in perfect order by height and function, his equipment cleaned and inspected despite having just arrived from basic training. It was the behavior of someone who understood that in military life, attention to detail could mean the difference between life and death. But to the other soldiers, it looked like showing off, like someone trying too hard to impress the drill instructors. They interpreted his precision as arrogance rather than recognizing it as the survival strategy it actually was. His personal belongings told a story that none of us bothered to read at the time. Along with the standard military-issued items, Martinez had brought an extensive collection of technical manuals, mechanical engineering textbooks, and what appeared to be maintenance guides for every piece of equipment the military used. These weren't required reading materials. They were the books of someone who decided to understand every aspect of military operations at a level that went far beyond basic competency. Every morning during roll call, Martinez had to strain his neck to see over the shoulders of the men in front of him. The formation was arranged by height during basic training, but here in advanced training, we lined up according to unit assignments and seniority, which meant Martinez was often surrounded by soldiers who blocked his view completely. I watched him during those morning formations, noting how he would subtly shift his position to find sight lines, never complaining but clearly working harder than anyone else just to see the drill instructor. The morning formations were brutal in the summer heat. We'd stand at attention for sometimes 30 or 40 minutes while officers discussed training schedules, mission updates, and administrative details. The sun would beat down on us relentlessly, and soldiers would occasionally faint from heat exhaustion. Martinez, with his smaller body mass, should have been more susceptible to heat-related problems, but he never showed any signs of distress. His conditioning was clearly superior to soldiers who looked much more physically impressive. During group exercises, he struggled to keep up with the longer strides of his fellow soldiers. What should have been a comfortable jog for the rest of us became a sprint for Martinez, his shorter legs working twice as hard to cover the same ground. I could see the determination in his face during these runs, the way he pushed himself beyond what should have been his physical limits rather than ask for accommodation or special consideration. The group runs were particularly revealing about the character of different soldiers. Some of the bigger, stronger men would complain loudly about the pace, the heat, the distance, or any other aspect of the exercise they found uncomfortable. Martinez never complained about anything, even when he was clearly working harder than anyone else in the formation. His running technique was fascinating to watch. While most soldiers relied on their natural stride length and cardiovascular conditioning, Martinez had developed a highly efficient running style that conserved energy and maximized his shorter stride. His breathing was controlled and rhythmic, his posture perfect, and his pace remarkably consistent even when the terrain or conditions changed. When we practiced combat formations, he often disappeared completely behind the broader backs of his teammates. Squad leaders would call out positions and movements, and Martinez would have to navigate by sound and instinct because he couldn't see the visual cues that guided the rest of us. Yet somehow, he always ended up in exactly the right position, as if he'd memorized not just his own role, but the movements of every other soldier in the formation. This ability to perform complex maneuvers without visual reference became one of the first indications that Martinez possessed capabilities that went far beyond what his physical appearance suggested. While other soldiers relied heavily on visual coordination and following the lead of teammates, Martinez had developed spatial awareness and tactical thinking that allowed him to function effectively even when he couldn't see what was happening around him. The other soldiers started calling him Pocket Soldier and Mini Martinez, names that followed him everywhere he went. What bothered me wasn't just the nicknames themselves, but the casual cruelty behind them. These weren't friendly nicknames earned through shared experiences. They were labels designed to remind Martinez that he didn't belong, that he would always be different, always be less than the real soldiers around him. The nickname culture in military units can be either bonding or bullying, depending on the intent behind it. Friendly nicknames usually celebrate something positive about a person, their skills, their personality, their achievements. The names attached to Martinez were designed to diminish him, to constantly remind him of what the other soldiers saw as his fundamental inadequacy. But what bothered me most wasn't the nicknames. It was how they treated him during meals. The mess hall had this unspoken hierarchy where the biggest, strongest soldiers sat at the front tables and everyone else filled in behind them according to their perceived value to the unit. Martinez always ended up at the back corner table, usually eating alone while listening to the boisterous conversations and laughter from the popular soldiers section. The mess hall was where the social dynamics of our unit became most apparent. Mealtimes were when soldiers bonded, shared stories, planned weekend activities, and built the camaraderie that would sustain them through difficult missions. But Martinez was systematically excluded from these connections. Not through any official policy or direct prohibition, but through the subtle social mechanisms that make someone invisible. The exclusion was methodical and complete. Soldiers would walk past his table carrying their trays, see the empty seats around him, and choose to crowd around tables where they had to stand, rather than sit with the unit outcast. Conversations would pause when he approached groups of soldiers, not because anyone told them to stop talking, but because his presence made them uncomfortable in ways they couldn't articulate. I watched him during those lonely dinners, and I noticed something the others missed. While they were busy joking and showing off, Martinez was studying. He'd spread military manuals across his table, reading about tactics, weapon systems, and combat strategies. Technical diagrams covered his dining space, like other soldiers might spread out playing cards or magazines. The manuals he studied weren't the basic materials we'd all been issued for required reading. These were advanced texts on military strategy, detailed technical specifications for weapon systems, historical analyses of successful and failed military operations. Martinez was educating himself at a level that went far beyond what our training program required. His study materials included engineering manuals for vehicles and equipment, tactical guides for special operations, and even foreign language materials that would help him understand enemy communications and documentation. While other soldiers were reading magazines or playing games during their free time, Martinez was building a comprehensive understanding of modern military operations. When the others were playing cards or watching movies during free time, Martinez was in the training yard, practicing his marksmanship or working on his physical conditioning. While they were sleeping in on weekends, he was running obstacle courses and perfecting techniques that had given him trouble during the week. His dedication was remarkable, but it came at a personal cost that was painful to observe. The isolation was wearing on him in ways that weren't immediately obvious, but became apparent to anyone who paid attention. His shoulders carried a tension that spoke of constant vigilance, the posture of someone who'd learned to expect hostility from every interaction. The physical training was where the humiliation reached its worst levels. During obstacle courses, Martinez had to jump higher than anyone else to clear barriers that others stepped over easily. His short legs meant he took twice as many steps to cover the same distance in running drills, and his reduced reach made every pull-up and rope climb exponentially more challenging than it was for soldiers with longer limbs. I remember one particularly brutal training session where we were practicing wall scaling techniques. The training wall was 12 feet high, designed to simulate the kind of obstacles soldiers might encounter during urban operations. Most of us could reach the top handholds with a running jump and some effort. For Martinez, reaching those same handholds required a combination of jumping ability, upper body strength, and technique that bordered on superhuman. When his first attempt failed, leaving him hanging from a handhold 6 feet below the top of the wall, Corporal Johnson's voice cut through the training yard like a whip. "Come on, Martinez. My grandmother could climb that wall faster, and she's been dead for 10 years. The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, designed to humiliate rather than motivate. But Martinez didn't give up. He dropped down, studied the wall for a moment, and attempted the climb again. This time he used a slightly different approach, finding intermediate handholds that others hadn't needed, creating his own path to the top. It took him 3 times longer than anyone else, but he reached the summit and rappelled down with the same controlled technique as soldiers twice his size. Corporal Johnson, a particularly cruel man who stood 6'3" and weighed over 200 pounds, seemed to take personal pleasure in Martinez's struggles. Johnson had the kind of imposing physical presence that intimidated most people automatically. Broad shoulders, thick arms, and a voice that could carry across a training field without effort. He'd served 2 tours in combat zones and wore his experience like armor against any criticism of his leadership methods. "Come on, Tiny! My grandmother climbs faster than that!" he'd shout during rope exercises, his voice dripping with contempt. "Maybe we should get you a booster seat for the obstacle course." The worst part was that some of the other soldiers would echo these comments, competing to see who could come up with the most humiliating joke. Johnson's cruelty went beyond simple mockery. During equipment inspections, he would scrutinize Martinez's gear with microscopic attention to detail, finding fault with preparations that he would accept without comment from other soldiers. If Martinez's boots weren't polished to an impossible standard, if his uniform had the slightest wrinkle, if his equipment wasn't arranged with perfect precision, Johnson would launch into extended tirades about military standards and professional appearance. "This is what happens when we lower our standards," Johnson would announce to the entire unit during these inspections. "When we accept soldiers who can't meet basic requirements, we compromise the integrity of the entire military. Excellence isn't negotiable, and neither is the minimum height requirement that apparently doesn't apply to everyone anymore." The breaking point came during a particularly brutal week of combat simulations. We were practicing urban warfare scenarios, clearing buildings, and defending positions against simulated enemy attacks. Martinez's size actually worked against him in these exercises because the training facilities were designed for average-sized soldiers. Doorways that others moved through smoothly became obstacles he had to navigate carefully. Windows that provided perfect cover for taller soldiers left him completely exposed. During one exercise, Martinez was assigned to provide covering fire from a second-story window while the rest of his squad advanced on an enemy position. The window was positioned at a height that required him to stand on his tiptoes to see out properly, making it nearly impossible to maintain steady aim while tracking moving targets. His shots went wide, missing the training targets that other soldiers hit easily from the same position. "Great job, sharpshooter," Sergeant Williams called out sarcastically when the exercise ended. "Maybe we should get you a phone book to stand on next time." The entire squad erupted in laughter, and I could see Martinez's jaw tighten slightly, the first crack in his composed exterior that I'd witnessed. That night, I found him in the armory, working with the weapons maintenance staff to understand the technical specifications of every rifle in our arsenal. He was asking detailed questions about sight adjustments, recoil compensation, and optimal firing positions for soldiers of different heights. The armorer, an older man named Peterson who'd served in 3 different conflicts, seemed impressed by Martinez's technical knowledge and genuine interest in improving his skills. "That boy's got something special," Peterson told me later. "Most soldiers just want to shoot things and look tough. That one actually understands the science behind what he's doing. He's been coming here every night for weeks, learning everything he can about these weapons. I've never seen dedication like that in someone so young." But dedication wasn't enough to change the social dynamics of our unit. If anything, Martinez's obvious efforts to improve only highlighted his limitations and gave the other soldiers more ammunition for their jokes. They started calling him Professor, mockingly, making fun of his studious approach to military training. The isolation was taking its toll. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged slightly when he thought no one was looking, in the way he'd hesitate for just a moment before entering rooms where he knew he'd face more mockery. He was developing the careful, measured movements of someone who'd learned to expect hostility from every interaction. What the others didn't see, what they were too busy laughing to notice, was that Martinez was becoming one of the most knowledgeable soldiers in our entire company. His nighttime study sessions had given him an encyclopedic understanding of military tactics, weapons systems, and strategic planning. His extra physical training, while not making him bigger, had made him incredibly efficient in his movements and surprisingly strong for his size. But knowledge and strength don't matter if no one respects you enough to listen to your ideas or trust you in critical situations. Martinez had become the ghost of our unit, present but invisible, contributing but unrecognized, fighting harder than anyone else but receiving none of the acknowledgement that effort deserved. As I watched him organizing his gear that night, preparing for what would turn out to be the most important mission of all our lives, I couldn't help but feel that we were missing something important. There was something in his quiet confidence, something in the way he approached every challenge with methodical determination that suggested we were underestimating him in ways we'd come to regret. Little did any of us know that within days, this overlooked soldier would prove that size means nothing when you have the heart of a true warrior. The intensity of our training increased dramatically as rumors began circulating about an upcoming high-stakes mission. Command wasn't sharing details, but the sudden focus on urban combat scenarios, night operations, and close-quarters battle techniques told us everything we needed to know. We were preparing for something dangerous, something that would test every skill we'd developed during our months of preparation. The change in training tempo was immediate and brutal. What had been 8-hour training days expanded to 12-hour sessions that pushed every soldier to their physical and mental limits. Sleep became a luxury rationed at 4 to 5 hours per night, and meals were consumed quickly between training modules that seemed designed to break down everything we thought we knew about combat operations. Martinez approached this new phase of training with the same methodical dedication he'd shown since day one. But now, there was something different about him. The constant harassment seemed to have forged something unbreakable in his spirit. While the other soldiers complained about the increased training load, the sleep deprivation, and the physical demands, Martinez absorbed every lesson like a sponge, taking detailed notes during briefings and asking thoughtful questions that often surprised our instructors. His notebook became legendary among the training staff. While other soldiers relied on memory or basic notes to retain information, Martinez maintained what amounted to a comprehensive encyclopedia of everything we learned. His handwriting was small and precise, allowing him to fit enormous amounts of information onto each page. The notes included not just the basic instruction material, but his own analysis, cross-references to related topics, and detailed diagrams that showed his understanding went far beyond surface-level memorization. The notebook sections were organized with military precision: weapons systems, tactical procedures, communication protocols, enemy intelligence, terrain analysis, and a dozen other categories that reflected the breadth of his studies. When other soldiers forgot details from previous training sessions, they started quietly asking Martinez for clarification, though they were careful not to let anyone see them seeking help from the soldier they publicly mocked. During night vision training, something remarkable happened. The exercise involved navigating through a mock urban environment in complete darkness, using only night vision goggles to identify targets and avoid obstacles. The training area was designed to be as disorienting as possible. Narrow alleyways, multiple levels, dead ends, and hidden obstacles that could trip up even experienced soldiers. Most of us struggled with the disorienting green-tinted view and the reduced depth perception that the night vision equipment created. The goggles were heavy, unbalanced, and required constant adjustment to maintain clear vision. Simple tasks like climbing stairs or moving through doorways became complex challenges when you couldn't judge distances accurately. But Martinez moved through the course like he'd been born for this kind of work. His smaller stature, which had been such a liability during daylight operations, became a tremendous advantage in the darkness. He could move through spaces that would require larger soldiers to crouch or crawl, maintaining his speed and stealth while others had to slow down and navigate carefully around obstacles. His lightweight frame allowed him to step quietly on surfaces that would creak ominously under heavier soldiers. Metal stairs, wooden floors, and loose gravel, all the surfaces that betrayed the presence of larger soldiers, remained silent under Martinez's careful footsteps. Most importantly, his lower profile made him incredibly difficult to spot, even with night vision equipment. The instructors began using him as a demonstration model for stealth techniques. "Watch Martinez," Master Sergeant Reynolds would tell the class. "Notice how he distributes his weight, how he tests each surface before committing his full body weight, how he uses shadows and cover that the rest of you are walking past without noticing." "Jesus, where did the kid go?" I heard Corporal Johnson muttering during one exercise, spinning around trying to locate Martinez, who had somehow maneuvered into position directly behind him without being detected. For the first time since joining our unit, Martinez had demonstrated a skill that not only matched his teammates, but actually exceeded their capabilities. The instructors noticed too. Sergeant Williams, who had been among Martinez's harshest critics, started using him as an example during stealth training sessions. "Watch how Martinez moves," he'd tell the class. "Notice how he uses his natural advantages instead of fighting against his limitations. This is what tactical thinking looks like." But even this recognition couldn't overcome months of established social dynamics. The other soldiers grudgingly acknowledged Martinez's night-fighting abilities while continuing to exclude him from their social circles and treating him as a second-class member of the unit. It was as if they could accept that he had one useful skill while still maintaining that he didn't really belong among real soldiers. The cognitive dissonance was remarkable to observe. The same soldiers who'd spent months mocking Martinez's size would praise his stealth abilities during training exercises, then return to their previous patterns of exclusion and mockery during mealtimes and social interactions. They couldn't reconcile their prejudices with the evidence they were witnessing. The breakthrough moment came during a complex urban assault simulation that required teams to infiltrate a multi-story building defended by instructors playing enemy combatants. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible. Multiple entry points were covered by machine gun positions, windows were barricaded, and rooftop access was heavily defended. Previous teams had attempted the exercise 17 times over the past 3 days, and every single attempt had resulted in complete failure. The building itself was a masterpiece of defensive architecture. 3 stories tall, constructed of reinforced concrete, with only 2 ground-level entrances and limited window access. The defending instructors had positioned themselves to create overlapping fields of fire that covered every approach route. Motion sensors and alarm systems added additional layers of security that made traditional infiltration techniques virtually impossible. Martinez had been assigned to a team led by Corporal Johnson, who clearly viewed him as dead weight that would only slow down their assault. During the mission planning phase, Johnson ignored every suggestion Martinez offered, dismissing his ideas without consideration and assigning him to a rear support role that would keep him away from the primary action. "This is a job for real soldiers," Johnson announced during the planning session. "We're going in hard and fast, overwhelming their defenses with superior firepower and aggressive tactics. There's no place for fancy techniques or complicated strategies." But Martinez had been studying the building layout during his free time, using his access to Peterson in the armory to understand the construction details and architectural features that other soldiers overlooked. He'd identified something that everyone else had missed, a ventilation system that ran through the building's exterior wall, with access panels that were just large enough for someone of his size to navigate. His analysis went far beyond the basic blueprints that other teams had studied. Martinez had researched the building's construction history, identified the types of materials used, understood the placement of electrical and plumbing systems, and even studied the specifications of the ventilation equipment. He knew the internal layout better than some of the instructors who designed the exercise. "There's another way in," Martinez said quietly during the final planning session. The ventilation shaft on the north wall connects to the building's interior air system. Someone small enough could bypass all the defended entry points and access the building from inside. Johnson looked at him like he'd suggested flying to the moon. That's not a real plan, kid. This is serious military training, not some spy movie fantasy. We're going in through the front door, like soldiers. The exercise proceeded exactly as all the previous attempts had. Johnson's team made a direct assault on the main entrance, ran directly into the prepared defenses, and was eliminated within minutes of beginning their attack. The machine gun positions that covered the entrance approaches cut down the attacking soldiers before they could advance more than a few yards from their starting positions. Another failure to add to the growing list of unsuccessful attempts. Johnson emerged from the exercise frustrated and angry, blaming everything except his own tactical inflexibility for the team's defeat. The building remained unconquered, and our training unit remained unsuccessful at what should have been a basic infiltration exercise. That night, Martinez approached the instructor who'd designed the exercise, a grizzled master sergeant named Reynolds, who'd served in actual combat operations around the world. Reynolds had fought in 3 different conflicts, led special operations teams through some of the most dangerous missions in military history, and developed training programs that were used throughout the military. "Sir, may I request permission to attempt a solo reconnaissance of the training facility?" Martinez asked, with the formal respect that military protocol demanded. Reynolds looked surprised. "Reconnaissance? What kind of reconnaissance, Private? I'd like to test a theory about alternative access routes, sir. If my approach works, it might provide valuable tactical information for future training exercises." Something in Martinez's tone, the confidence behind his words, convinced Reynolds to approve the unusual request. After 17 failed attempts by full teams, the idea of letting one soldier try a solo approach wasn't any more ridiculous than continuing to repeat the same failed strategies. "You have 30 minutes, Private. Radio contact every 5 minutes. If you're discovered by the defending instructors, you're out immediately." What happened next became legendary among our training staff. Martinez disappeared into the darkness around the building and seemed to vanish completely. His radio check-ins came precisely on schedule, but none of the defending instructors reported any sign of infiltration attempts. For 25 minutes, it appeared that Martinez had simply melted into the shadows. The defending instructors were experienced combat veterans who'd successfully repelled 17 previous infiltration attempts. They knew every possible approach route, every potential weakness in their defensive positions, every technique that attacking soldiers might use to breach their perimeter. But they had no idea where Martinez was or what he was doing. Then, suddenly, the building's interior lights began flashing in a specific pattern, the signal that indicated a successful mission completion. Somehow, Martinez had not only infiltrated the impregnable facility, but had reached the central command room and activated the objective markers that previous teams had been unable to access. Master Sergeant Reynolds' voice crackled over the radio. "Private Martinez, please report your current position." Martinez's calm response came from inside the building. "Central command room, sir. All objective markers have been activated. The defending instructors never detected my presence." The silence that followed was profound. Reynolds had designed this exercise to be nearly impossible, assuming that eventually some team would develop the coordination and tactical sophistication necessary to succeed. He'd never imagined that a single soldier could accomplish what 17 full teams had failed to achieve. The aftermath of that exercise changed everything, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of earning respect from his fellow soldiers, Martinez's success seemed to increase their resentment. They couldn't deny his achievement, but they could minimize its importance by claiming it was just a fluke, a lucky accident that wouldn't work in real combat situations. "Anyone can crawl through a vent," Corporal Johnson grumbled, his voice heavy with defensive anger. That's not real soldiering. That's just being small enough to fit in places where you don't belong. The response revealed the depth of the other soldiers' psychological investment in their prejudices. Acknowledging Martinez's capabilities would force them to confront their own behavior, to admit that they'd been wrong about someone they'd spent months tormenting. It was easier to minimize his achievement than to face the uncomfortable truth about their own character. But the instructors were paying attention now. Martinez started receiving specialized training in reconnaissance and infiltration techniques. His scores on tactical planning exercises consistently ranked among the highest in our class. His weapons proficiency, while still challenged by equipment designed for larger soldiers, had improved dramatically through his dedicated practice sessions. More importantly, Martinez had gained something that no amount of traditional training could provide: absolute confidence in his own abilities. The quiet soldier, who'd absorbed months of humiliation, was transforming into someone who understood exactly what he was capable of achieving. He still didn't respond to the mockery and exclusion, but now it was clearly a strategic choice rather than passive acceptance. 3 weeks later, we received our mission briefing. Our unit was being deployed to assist in operations against a well-fortified enemy position that had been causing significant problems for Allied forces. The enemy had established themselves in an abandoned industrial complex surrounded by high walls and defended by sophisticated anti-aircraft systems that prevented direct aerial assault. Intelligence reports indicated that previous ground assaults had failed because the enemy position was too well defended to approach using conventional tactics. Multiple units had attempted to breach the perimeter, but the combination of elevated defensive positions and interlocking fields of fire made traditional approaches virtually suicidal. Command was looking for creative solutions, unconventional approaches that might succeed where direct assaults had failed. As Master Sergeant Reynolds explained the mission parameters, I couldn't help but notice that he kept glancing in Martinez's direction, as if he was already considering possibilities that the rest of us hadn't imagined. This mission will require every soldier to perform at their absolute peak, Reynolds concluded. We can't afford any weak links, any hesitation, any failure to execute under pressure. Each of you will be tested in ways that training exercises can't simulate. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happens next will completely change everything you think you know about this soldier and the incredible twist that's coming. The real story is just beginning, and the transformation you're about to witness will leave you speechless. Martinez packed his gear that night with the same methodical care he'd always shown, but there was something different in his movements now. This wasn't the uncertain young soldier who'd arrived at our compound months ago. This was someone who'd found his purpose, who understood exactly why all those months of struggle and preparation had been necessary. As we prepared for departure, none of us could have imagined that we were about to witness one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in military history, performed by the one soldier we'd all underestimated. The enemy industrial complex looked like something from a nightmare when we first laid eyes on it through our binoculars. Massive concrete walls stretched in every direction, topped with razor wire and punctuated by guard towers that commanded perfect views of the surrounding terrain. Intelligence photos hadn't fully captured the imposing nature of this fortress. It was clear why previous assault attempts had failed so catastrophically. The complex sprawled across nearly 2 square miles of desert terrain, its grey concrete walls rising 20 feet above the surrounding landscape. From our observation position 3 miles away, we could see the systematic layout of defensive positions, the coordinated patrol patterns of enemy soldiers, and the ominous shape of anti-aircraft installations that bristled from strategic points throughout the facility. Our unit had approached under cover of darkness, using natural terrain features to get within observation distance of the target. The journey had taken 18 hours of careful movement through hostile territory. avoiding enemy patrols and surveillance equipment while carrying full combat loads that tested everyone's endurance to the breaking point. The plan was straightforward in concept, but brutally challenging in execution. We would identify weaknesses in the enemy's defenses, coordinate with supporting units positioned around the complex, and attempt a dawn assault that would overwhelm their positions before they could mount an effective response. Martinez had been assigned to one of the observation teams, positioned on a rocky outcropping that provided an excellent view of the northern wall section. I was part of the same team, along with Corporal Johnson and 3 other soldiers. Our job was to monitor enemy patrol patterns, identify potential entry points that the assault teams could exploit, and provide real-time intelligence to the command element coordinating the overall attack. The observation position was carefully chosen for its combination of concealment and visibility. Large boulders provided cover from enemy surveillance, while gaps between the rocks allowed clear sightlines to the target complex. The position was uncomfortable: sharp rocks, limited space for movement, and exposure to the desert's extreme temperature variations, but it offered the perfect vantage point for studying enemy defenses. For 6 hours we watched and recorded everything. Enemy soldiers moved in predictable patterns along the wall tops, their timing so consistent that we could set our watches by their rotations. Guard towers maintained constant radio communication, reporting status updates every 15 minutes with mechanical precision. It was clear that these weren't amateur fighters. Their discipline and organization indicated professional military training. The enemy's defensive preparations were sophisticated and thorough. Interlocking fields of fire covered every approach route. Multiple backup positions allowed defenders to maintain coverage even if primary positions were compromised, and communication systems ensured that any breach would be immediately reported and reinforced. Martinez spent those 6 hours not just observing the obvious defensive positions, but studying architectural details that the rest of us overlooked. He noted the placement of ventilation systems, the design of drainage infrastructure, the positioning of utility connections that serviced the complex. While we focused on guards and weapons, he was analyzing the building systems that made the facility function. But as dawn approached, something went terribly wrong with our mission timeline. The coordinated assault that was supposed to begin at first light never materialized. Radio communications with our command element went silent, and our supporting units failed to appear at their designated positions. Slowly, horribly, we realized that our operation had been compromised. The first indication of disaster came when enemy spotlights suddenly blazed to life, sweeping across the terrain around the complex with deadly precision. These weren't random security sweeps. The lights moved with purpose, clearly searching for specific targets in areas where our units had been positioned. The spotlights were mounted on the guard towers and operated by teams who obviously knew exactly where to look. They probed the terrain features that would provide the best concealment for observation teams, the approach routes that attacking forces would naturally use, and the rally points where our units had planned to assemble for the assault. "They know we're here," Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible even to those of us lying just a few feet away. "This isn't a routine security alert. They're hunting for us specifically." Corporal Johnson started to argue, his military pride refusing to accept that our mission could have been compromised so completely. But the sound of distant gunfire cut him off. Somewhere to our south, one of our observation teams had been discovered and was engaged in a desperate firefight with enemy forces. The sharp crack of rifle fire echoed off the complex walls, punctuated by the heavier thump of grenade explosions. The gunfire was intense but brief, suggesting that our people had been quickly overwhelmed by superior numbers or firepower. The silence that followed was ominous. Either our soldiers had been killed or captured, or they'd managed to escape, but were now cut off from the rest of our force. Then we heard the sound that made our blood run cold, helicopter rotors in the distance, growing steadily louder. The enemy had air support, and they were bringing it to bear against our scattered positions. Without our own air cover or heavy weapons, we were completely outmatched. The helicopters approached from multiple directions, their searchlights sweeping the terrain in coordinated patterns that left no hiding place unexposed. These weren't transportation aircraft. They were attack helicopters armed with missiles and machine guns, capable of destroying our entire unit in minutes. "We need to withdraw," Johnson said, already beginning to gather his equipment. "Get back to the rally point and regroup with whatever's left of the other units." But Martinez was studying the complex through his binoculars with intense concentration, as if he was seeing something the rest of us had missed. The helicopters were getting closer, their rotor noise growing louder, but he remained focused on the enemy installation with the intensity of someone solving a mathematical equation. "Look at the anti-aircraft battery on the eastern tower," he said quietly. "The radar array is active, but the missile launchers are pointed in defensive positions. They're not expecting air support from our side." "So what?" Johnson snapped, his voice tight with stress and the growing sound of approaching aircraft. "We don't have any air support to worry about." "But we could have," Martinez replied, his voice gaining confidence despite the deteriorating tactical situation around us. "There are Allied aircraft on standby at the forward airbase, waiting for confirmation that the target's air defenses have been neutralized. If someone could disable that anti-aircraft system," the implications of his statement hit us all at the same time. "Without their air defense umbrella, the enemy complex would be vulnerable to devastating aerial bombardment." The heavily fortified position that had withstood multiple ground assaults could be eliminated in minutes by precision airstrikes. But reaching that anti-aircraft battery seemed impossible. It was located on a tower deep inside the complex, surrounded by multiple layers of defenses and accessible only through heavily guarded areas. Even if someone could somehow breach the perimeter, they'd have to cross hundreds of yards of open ground under constant observation from guard towers and patrol units. The helicopter sounds were getting closer now, and we could see the aircraft's searchlights beginning to probe the rocky terrain around our position. The beams swept back and forth with mechanical precision, each pass bringing them closer to our hiding spot. In minutes, maybe seconds, we'd be discovered and would have to fight our way out against overwhelming odds. That's when Martinez did something that surprised all of us. Instead of preparing for withdrawal like the rest of the team, he was studying the complex wall section directly below our observation point, with the intensity of someone who'd found the solution to an impossible problem. "There," he said suddenly, pointing to a section of wall that looked identical to every other section we'd been staring at for hours. "Do you see that discoloration in the concrete about 40 feet down from the guard tower?" I focused my binoculars on the area he'd indicated and could barely make out a slight variation in the wall's surface, a rectangular outline that was slightly darker than the surrounding concrete. It could have been a maintenance access panel or just a stain from years of weathering. Without Martinez pointing it out, I never would have noticed it. "That's a ventilation intake," Martinez continued, his voice gaining urgency as the helicopter sounds grew louder. "The complex has an internal air circulation system, and that panel provides external access for maintenance. If someone could reach it—" "Doug could reach it?" Johnson interrupted, his voice rising with disbelief and growing panic. "Are you insane? That panel is 40 feet down a sheer concrete wall, in full view of 2 guard towers and God knows how many patrols. Even if someone could somehow get down there without being seen, that panel is probably sealed or alarmed or—" He stopped talking as Martinez began removing equipment from his pack with swift, efficient movements. The quiet soldier who'd endured months of mockery was transforming before our eyes into someone completely different. Someone who'd found his moment of purpose and was preparing to seize it regardless of the consequences. Martinez's equipment selection was precise and purposeful. He kept his sidearm, basic ammunition, communication equipment, and a small toolkit that included wire cutters, electrical testing equipment, and demolition charges. Everything else, Extra ammunition, food, additional gear was left behind to reduce weight and increase mobility. "The panel isn't alarmed," Martinez said with absolute certainty. "Maintenance access points for air systems are rarely connected to security networks because they need to be accessible for emergency repairs. And I'm small enough to fit through the ventilation system once I'm inside." The helicopter was almost on top of us now, its searchlight beam sweeping across the rocks just 50 yards from our position. The rotor wash was creating small dust storms that threatened to expose our position even if the light didn't find us directly. In seconds, we'd be exposed and would have to abandon our observation point, probably under heavy fire from aircraft weapons. Martinez finished his equipment check and looked directly at Corporal Johnson with an expression of calm determination that was completely at odds with the chaos developing around us. "Give me covering fire if they spot me on the wall. Radio the forward air base and tell them to prepare for an immediate strike mission once the air defenses go down." "This is suicide," Johnson protested, his voice cracking under the stress of their impossible situation. "You'll never make it to that wall, let alone inside the complex. And even if you do, you don't know how to disable an anti-aircraft system." Martinez's response revealed the depth of knowledge he'd accumulated during all those months of extra study and training with Peterson in the armory. Soviet-era SA-6 surface-to-air missile system, probably modified with updated radar and targeting computers. Main power supply will be a diesel generator with manual backup systems. Disable the generator and cut the backup power lines. The entire system goes offline for at least 20 minutes while they restart and recalibrate. His technical knowledge was comprehensive and precise. He knew not just the basic operation of the weapon system, but the specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited, the redundant systems that would need to be disabled, and the time windows that would be available for airstrikes once the defenses were down. He was already moving, low crawling toward the edge of the rocky outcropping, while the helicopter's searchlight swept past our position. The aircraft was so close that we could feel the rotor wash stirring the air around us. But somehow the crew remained unaware that 5 enemy soldiers were hiding just below their flight path. 20 minutes is more than enough time for airstrikes to eliminate the complex," Martinez called back, over the noise of the helicopter, his voice steady and confident, despite the insane nature of what he was attempting. What happened next was the most terrifying and inspiring thing I've ever witnessed in my military career. Martinez disappeared over the edge of the rocks like a ghost, using handholds and ledges that the rest of us couldn't even see. Within moments, he'd reached the base of the complex wall and was working his way along the shadows toward the ventilation panel he'd identified. His descent was masterful, a demonstration of rock climbing skills that none of us knew he possessed. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years developing these capabilities, finding routes down the cliff face that seemed impossible for someone without extensive mountaineering experience. The helicopter passed directly overhead, its crew apparently unaware that one of our soldiers was now moving along the base of the enemy complex. Guard patrols continued their regular rounds, their attention focused outward toward the terrain where they expected threats to emerge, not downward toward their own walls. Martinez reached the ventilation panel and began working on it with tools from his kit. Even through our binoculars, we could see the methodical way he approached the task. Not rushing, not panicking, just applying the technical knowledge he'd spent months acquiring. The panel came free, revealing a dark opening just large enough for someone of Martinez's size to squeeze through. He looked back toward our position once, gave a brief hand signal, and disappeared into the enemy complex. Now all we could do was wait and pray that the smallest soldier in our unit could accomplish what entire assault teams had failed to achieve. Once Martinez disappeared into that ventilation shaft, the waiting became almost unbearable. We had no way to communicate with him, no way to know if he'd been discovered, captured, or worse. The only thing we could do was monitor enemy communications through our radio intercept equipment and watch for any signs that their security status had changed. The radio intercept equipment was our lifeline to understanding what was happening inside the complex. We could monitor multiple frequency bands simultaneously, picking up enemy communications, even though we couldn't understand most of what they were saying. But tone, urgency, and communication patterns could tell us a lot about their operational status. For the first 15 minutes, everything remained exactly as it had been. Enemy patrols continued their regular rounds. Guard towers maintained their routine radio check-ins, and the anti-aircraft radar array continued its steady sweeping pattern across the sky. To all outward appearances, the complex's defenders had no idea that an infiltrator was moving through their ventilation system, but I knew Martinez well enough by now to understand that those 15 minutes of apparent inactivity actually represented incredible progress. He would be navigating a maze of air ducts and maintenance passages, moving slowly and carefully to avoid making any sound that might alert building occupants to his presence. Every step had to be calculated, every movement deliberate. The ventilation system in a complex that size would be extensive and complex, with multiple levels of ducts serving different areas of the facility. Martinez would need to navigate using the building schematics he'd memorized, finding his way through a three-dimensional maze while working in complete darkness and confined spaces that would challenge even experienced infiltration specialists. Corporal Johnson was growing increasingly agitated as time passed. "He's been captured," he muttered repeatedly, his voice betraying the stress that all of us were feeling. "Or killed, or both." This whole thing was insane from the beginning. I tried to imagine what Martinez was experiencing inside that complex. The ventilation system would be dark, cramped, and disorienting. He'd have to navigate using only his tactical flashlight, following building schematics he'd memorized during his obsessive study sessions. Every turn could lead to a dead end. Every sound from the building around him could indicate approaching danger. The physical challenges would be enormous. Crawling through spaces barely large enough for his body, maintaining silence while moving over metal ductwork that could echo throughout the building, managing his equipment and weapons in spaces where there was no room to maneuver. It was exactly the kind of mission that required someone with Martinez's combination of size, technical knowledge, and absolute determination. At 18 minutes, we got our first indication that something was happening. The steady pattern of radio communications from the Eastern Guard Tower began to change. Instead of routine status reports every 15 minutes, they started making shorter, more frequent transmissions. We couldn't understand the language, but the tone suggested increased alertness. "They know something's wrong," I whispered to Johnson. "Not specifically what, but their security posture is changing." Johnson was studying the complex through his binoculars with renewed intensity. The patrol pattern on the eastern wall just changed too. They're moving more frequently, and they're looking inward instead of outward. The change in enemy behavior was subtle but significant. Instead of maintaining their outward focus on potential external threats, some of the guards were beginning to examine their own facility more carefully. It suggested that someone had noticed something unusual, a sound, a missing maintenance panel, or some other indicator that their security had been compromised. 22 minutes after Martinez had disappeared, the Eastern Guard Tower went completely silent. No more radio transmissions, no more routine check-ins, no responses when other towers tried to contact them. Whatever Martinez had done, it was working. The silence from the guard tower meant that he'd either disabled the guards or found a way to interfere with their communications. But we knew that silence couldn't last long before other defenders noticed the communication breakdown and came to investigate. Standard military protocol would require other units to physically check on any position that went silent during operational periods. At 24 minutes, the lights went out. Not just in the Eastern Tower, but throughout the entire eastern section of the complex. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing that portion of the facility in an eerie red glow that made everything look like a scene from a horror movie. Alarm sirens began wailing, and we could see enemy personnel running toward the darkened area with flashlights and emergency equipment. "He did it," Johnson breathed, his voice filled with disbelief and grudging admiration. "The crazy little bastard actually did it." But the celebration was premature. The anti-aircraft radar array was still functioning, still sweeping the sky with its electronic surveillance. Martinez had disabled some of the complex's systems, but not the critical ones that would allow our air support to attack safely. Through our radio intercept equipment, we could hear the enemy's frantic communications as they tried to understand what was happening in their eastern section. Repair teams were being dispatched, security sweeps were being organized, and backup power systems were being activated throughout the facility. The enemy response was professional and coordinated, exactly what you'd expect from well-trained military personnel dealing with a security crisis. They weren't panicking, but they were clearly taking the situation seriously and mobilizing significant resources to identify and eliminate the threat. At 26 minutes, we heard explosions from inside the complex. Small charges, probably Martinez, using his demolition equipment to disable electrical systems or fuel supplies. The explosions were muffled by the building structure, but they were definitely coming from the interior of the facility and definitely weren't accidental. At 27 minutes, the radar array finally went silent. The change was so sudden and complete that at first we thought our own equipment had malfunctioned, but checking multiple radio frequencies confirmed what we desperately hoped was true. The sophisticated anti-aircraft system that had protected this complex for months was completely offline. Johnson immediately began transmitting to the forward airbase. Tango Base, this is Observer 7. Package delivery authorized. Repeat, package delivery authorized. Anti-aircraft defenses are down. The response came back within seconds. Observer 7, roger. Package delivery in progress. Estimate 5 minutes to target. Now we faced a new problem. Martinez was still somewhere inside that complex, and in 5 minutes it was going to be subjected to devastating aerial bombardment. We had no way to warn him, no way to coordinate his escape, no way to ensure he could get clear of the target area before our own aircraft turned it into rubble. The precision airstrike that had been planned for this target would use bunker-busting bombs and incendiary weapons designed to completely destroy fortified positions. There would be no safe areas inside the complex when those weapons started falling. No basement or reinforced position that could protect someone from the explosive power that was coming. As if the situation wasn't already tense enough, the enemy had figured out that their communications blackout wasn't just a technical malfunction. Searchlights from the remaining towers began probing the darkened eastern section, and heavily armed security teams were converging on the area where Martinez had penetrated their defenses. We could see enemy soldiers moving with purpose and coordination, clearly following predetermined security protocols for dealing with infiltration attempts. They had dogs, electronic detection equipment, and enough personnel to conduct a thorough search of the entire eastern section of the complex. At 31 minutes, we saw a small figure emerge from a maintenance building near the base of the eastern wall. Even at distance, even in the chaos of emergency lighting and searching spotlights, I recognized Martinez's distinctive movement pattern. He was alive, he was mobile, and he was attempting to escape the complex before the airstrike arrived. But between him and safety lay 200 yards of open ground, multiple guard towers with overlapping fields of fire, and security teams that were now actively hunting for the saboteur who'd crippled their defenses. The route he'd used to infiltrate the complex through the ventilation system wasn't available for his escape because emergency protocols had sealed many of the building's external access points. Martinez began moving along the base of the wall, staying in shadows and using debris and equipment for concealment. His movement was patient and methodical, exactly what his training had taught him. But we could all see that patient and methodical wasn't going to be fast enough. The airstrike was coming, and he needed to clear the impact zone before those bombs started falling. He was using every piece of cover available: maintenance equipment, storage containers, architectural features that provided concealment from the guard towers. His movement technique was flawless, the result of months of training in stealth and infiltration tactics. A guard patrol spotted him at 33 minutes. Shouts erupted from the direction of the eastern wall, followed immediately by the sharp crack of rifle fire. Muzzle flashes strobed in the darkness as enemy soldiers began shooting at the small figure trying to escape their complex. Martinez responded exactly as he'd been trained. He found cover behind a concrete barrier and began returning fire with precision shots that forced the enemy soldiers to take cover themselves. His marksmanship training was evident in the accuracy of his shots, even under the extreme stress of combat. But his position was untenable. More security teams were converging on his location, and he was outnumbered at least 10 to 1. The concrete barrier that provided his cover was being steadily chipped away by enemy fire, and it was only a matter of time before he'd be forced to move to a new position. That's when the rest of our observation team made a decision that violated every tactical principle we'd ever learned. Instead of maintaining our concealed position and continuing our surveillance mission, we opened fire on the enemy complex. Johnson started it, placing accurate rifle shots into the guard towers to suppress their defensive fire. His years of combat experience showed in the precision of his shooting. He wasn't trying to eliminate the enemy positions, just force them to take cover and reduce their effectiveness. The rest of us followed his lead, targeting enemy personnel who were moving to surround Martinez's position. We couldn't save him, we were too far away and too outnumbered, but we could give him a fighting chance to reach safety. Our intervention created exactly the distraction Martinez needed. While enemy attention was divided between his position and our sniper fire from the rocky outcropping, he managed to move from his initial cover position to a drainage culvert that ran along the base of the outer wall. The drainage system had been designed to handle desert flash floods, with concrete channels that were deep enough to provide cover from small arms fire. Martinez used this infrastructure exactly as it should be used, as a protected route that allowed movement while minimizing exposure to enemy observation. At 36 minutes, we heard the sound of approaching aircraft. The airstrike was coming in right on schedule, and Martinez was still inside the impact zone. The drainage culvert provided some protection from small arms fire, but it wouldn't shield him from the explosive power of precision-guided bombs designed to level concrete fortifications. Martinez must have heard the aircraft too, because his movement patterns suddenly changed from careful and concealed to fast and desperate. He abandoned stealth completely and began sprinting across open ground toward a breach in the outer wall that looked like it might provide access to safety. Enemy fire intensified as he broke cover, bullets striking the ground around him and chipping concrete from nearby structures. But his size and speed, the same physical characteristics that had made him a target for mockery during training, now became advantages that kept him alive under fire. At 38 minutes, Martinez disappeared through the wall breach. At 39 minutes, the first bombs began falling. The explosion was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, even during combat operations. The precision-guided munitions struck the complex with devastating accuracy, turning massive concrete structures into clouds of dust and debris. The anti-aircraft battery that Martinez had disabled was vaporized in the first wave of attacks, along with the buildings that had housed it. Secondary explosions began as the bombs touched off fuel storage areas and ammunition depots throughout the complex. What had been an impregnable fortress just minutes earlier was transforming into a scene of complete destruction. We maintained our position until the airstrike was complete, partly to observe the results, and partly because we needed to know if Martinez had survived his desperate escape attempt. When the bombing finally stopped and the dust began to settle, we could see that the eastern section of the complex, the area where Martinez had conducted his sabotage mission, had been completely obliterated. But in the distance, moving away from the ruined complex across the open terrain beyond the outer wall, we could see a small figure walking steadily toward our position. Martinez had not only accomplished the impossible mission, he'd survived it. The walk back to our rally point after the airstrike became one of those surreal experiences that changes how you see everything around you. Martinez, covered in concrete dust and looking like he'd been through a war zone, which he had, walked among us as the same person who'd endured months of ridicule and dismissal. But everything else about our dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The desert landscape around us seemed different somehow, as if Martinez's achievement had altered the basic nature of reality. The same rocks and sand that had witnessed his humiliation were now the stage for his triumph. The oppressive heat that had made our approach march so miserable now felt like a celebration of survival. Corporal Johnson, who'd spent countless hours mocking Martinez's size and questioning his capabilities, couldn't stop staring at him during our march back to base. Several times Johnson started to say something, then stopped, apparently unable to find words adequate for what he'd witnessed. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. Johnson was a career soldier who'd built his identity around physical dominance and traditional military values. Martinez's success had shattered every assumption Johnson had made about what makes an effective soldier. "How did you know?" Johnson finally asked when we stopped for a brief rest. "How did you know about the ventilation system, about the anti-aircraft battery, about any of it?" Martinez's response was typical of the quiet confidence he'd developed over the past months. "I studied the intelligence reports every night for weeks. The building blueprints were in the mission files, and Peterson helped me understand the technical specifications of the Soviet air defense systems. When you're smaller than everyone else, you learn to find advantages they can't see." The truth was more complex than his modest explanation suggested. While the rest of us had been focused on traditional assault tactics and conventional approaches to the problem, Martinez had been analyzing every detail of the target complex with the systematic thoroughness that had always characterized his approach to military training. What we'd dismissed as obsessive studying had actually been strategic preparation for exactly this kind of situation. His preparation had gone far beyond reading intelligence reports. Martinez had researched the construction company that had built the complex, studied the architectural standards used in Soviet-era industrial facilities, and even learned enough of the local language to understand technical documentation that other soldiers couldn't read. But the real transformation wasn't in how Martinez saw himself. It was in how everyone else began to see him. Word of his accomplishments spread through our unit, then through the entire base, then through the command structure with the speed that only extraordinary military achievements can generate. The story grew and evolved as it passed from person to person, taking on legendary qualities that sometimes exceeded the already remarkable reality. Some versions had Martinez single-handedly eliminating entire enemy units. Others described technical achievements that bordered on the supernatural. But even the most embellished accounts couldn't diminish the fundamental truth of what he'd accomplished. Master Sergeant Reynolds was waiting for us when we reached the rally point, and his first words weren't about mission debriefing or tactical analysis. "Private Martinez," he said, "I need to understand exactly how you accomplished what happened today." The debriefing lasted 6 hours. Martinez walked Reynolds and a room full of senior officers through every step of his infiltration, from identifying the ventilation access point to navigating the internal building systems to locating and disabling the anti-aircraft battery. His detailed knowledge of Soviet weapon systems impressed even the intelligence specialists who'd been studying these targets for years. What emerged from that debriefing was a picture of a soldier who'd been preparing for this moment without even knowing it. Every extra hour in the training yard, every night studying technical manuals, every session with Peterson learning about weapons systems, it had all contributed to the knowledge and skills that made his mission possible. The officers conducting the debriefing were experienced combat veterans who'd seen exceptional soldiers throughout their careers, but Martinez's combination of technical knowledge, tactical thinking, and pure determination impressed them at a level they'd rarely encountered. More importantly, Martinez had developed something that couldn't be taught in any training program: the ability to see solutions where others saw only problems. His approach to the infiltration mission demonstrated tactical thinking at a level that impressed officers with decades of combat experience. What you accomplished today changes how we think about special operations, Reynolds told Martinez at the conclusion of the debriefing. You've proven that unconventional approaches can succeed where traditional tactics fail. This mission will be studied and analyzed for years to come. Within days, Martinez's story had reached the highest levels of our command structure. The operation became a case study in unconventional tactics and the importance of utilizing every soldier's unique capabilities. Military training programs began incorporating lessons learned from Martinez's approach to problem solving under extreme pressure. But the most significant changes happened within our own unit. Soldiers who'd spent months treating Martinez as a liability began seeking his input on tactical problems. His insights during mission planning sessions were not only welcomed, but actively solicited. The knowledge he'd accumulated through months of dedicated study was finally being recognized as the valuable resource it had always been. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Martinez's bunk, which had been isolated in the corner of the barracks, became a gathering point for soldiers seeking advice or wanting to participate in his study sessions. His table in the mess hall, which had been empty for months, was now surrounded by soldiers who competed for the opportunity to learn from him. Corporal Johnson underwent perhaps the most dramatic transformation. The man who'd been Martinez's harshest critic became one of his strongest advocates, telling anyone who would listen about the incredible courage and skill he'd witnessed during the mission. I was wrong about him, Johnson told me privately one evening, his voice heavy with something that might have been shame. We all were. I kept seeing what he couldn't do instead of recognizing what he could do. He's not a small soldier trying to be big. He's a different kind of soldier entirely, one who can accomplish things the rest of us never even consider. Johnson's transformation was painful to witness because it forced him to confront his own prejudices and behavior. He'd spent months tormenting someone who was clearly his superior in knowledge, dedication, and military capability. The recognition of his own failings was eating at him in ways that were obvious to anyone who knew him well. Martinez's promotion to specialist came through within 2 weeks, along with a commendation for valor that recognized not just his successful mission, but the innovative thinking that had made it possible. More importantly, he was selected for advanced training in reconnaissance and special operations, roles that would utilize his unique capabilities rather than trying to force him into conventional soldier templates. The promotion ceremony was unlike any I'd witnessed during my military career. Usually these events were routine administrative procedures attended by the minimum number of required personnel. Martinez's promotion drew officers and enlisted personnel from throughout the base, all wanting to witness the recognition of someone who'd redefined what it meant to be an effective soldier. The respect he'd earned was genuine and complete. During mess hall conversations, Martinez's opinions on tactical matters carried weight equal to those of senior enlisted personnel. Training exercises began incorporating scenarios specifically designed to take advantage of unconventional approaches that someone like Martinez might identify. What struck me most during this transformation was Martinez himself remained essentially unchanged. He didn't become arrogant or boastful about his achievement. He continued his pattern of dedicated study and extra training, now focused on the advanced skills his new role would require. The same methodical approach that had sustained him through months of mockery now drove his preparation for even greater challenges. But there was one significant difference. Martinez was no longer alone. Other soldiers began joining his evening study sessions, learning from his systematic approach to military knowledge. His technical discussions with Peterson in the armory became group learning opportunities that attracted soldiers from throughout the base. The isolation that had defined his early months in our unit was replaced by a different kind of social dynamic, one based on respect for his abilities and recognition of his contributions rather than superficial characteristics like height or weight. 6 months later, Martinez volunteered for a special operations unit that specialized in high-risk reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. His application was accepted immediately, with commanding officers noting that his demonstrated ability to accomplish impossible missions made him exactly the kind of soldier they needed for their most challenging assignments. The special operations community is extremely selective, accepting only soldiers who've proven themselves under the most demanding conditions. Martinez's acceptance into this elite group represented the ultimate validation of his capabilities and the final repudiation of everyone who doubted him. Before he left our unit for his new assignment, Martinez pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Thank you for being the only one who never treated me like I didn't belong here," he said. "Your respect meant more to me than you'll ever know." But I had to correct him on that point. "I respected your dedication," I told him, "but I never fully understood your capabilities until I watched you save all our lives. You taught all of us something about what real strength looks like." The truth was, Martinez had transformed not just his own military career, but our entire understanding of what makes an effective soldier. His story became legendary within our command structure, used as an example of why diversity of capabilities and approaches strengthens military units rather than weakening them. Years later, when I was training new recruits, I would always tell Martinez's story during sessions about teamwork and respect. Not just the dramatic infiltration mission, but the months of preparation that made it possible. The dedication to improvement, even when no one was watching. The quiet determination to excel, despite constant discouragement. Most importantly, I would tell them about the danger of judging people by superficial characteristics instead of recognizing their true potential. Martinez looked like the least likely hero any of us could imagine, but he possessed the knowledge, skills, and courage necessary to accomplish what entire assault teams had failed to achieve. His story reminds us that heroes don't always look like what we expect. Sometimes they're the quiet ones who study while others sleep, who prepare while others assume, who see possibilities where others see only limitations. Sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the person who will save your life when everything else has failed. The smallest soldier in our unit became the biggest hero any of us had ever known, not by becoming something different than what he was, but by fully realizing the potential of exactly who he'd always been. Martinez taught us that strength isn't measured in inches or pounds, but in determination, knowledge, and the courage to act when others hesitate. He showed us that the qualities we dismiss as weaknesses might actually be our greatest advantages, if we're smart enough to recognize them and brave enough to use them. His legacy extends far beyond that single mission or even his individual achievements. Martinez changed how our entire military thinks about soldier capabilities, training programs, and the importance of utilizing every person's unique strengths, rather than trying to force everyone into the same mold. What did you think of this incredible story of courage and determination? Have you ever been underestimated or found yourself judging someone based on appearances rather than their true capabilities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales of unexpected heroes and remarkable human achievements. And don't miss the next recommended video, where I'll share another story about someone who proved that our greatest weaknesses can become our most powerful strengths. Remember, the next time you meet someone who doesn't fit your expectations of what a hero should look like, you might be meeting exactly the person who will surprise you the most.